Welcome to the Highly Sensitive Woman. Today, I have the privilege of hosting a creative wellness coach who helps highly sensitive, high-achieving women in STEM ease stress and burnout with simple art and mindful practices. With a background in medical device quality and regulatory affairs, she blends science and creativity to offer practical tools for calming the nervous system, setting kinder boundaries, and feeling like a person again outside of work. Welcome, Lexi Reid.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
Oh, it is just an honor for me to have you here and for you to share all of your wisdom around creativity and how we can tap into that as a way to explore a lot of things. And we're going to get into that a little bit more later. But first, I want to take a few minutes to talk about how you personally kind of blend that STEM part of you and the creative part of you, because I think it's really important that we talk about this idea of and versus or. And I know for me, so much of my life, I thought that I had to fit into a box, and we don't have to. And so I just went to hear your perspective on that and your journey.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you say the and versus or because, as a child, it was like you were and everything. I can be an artist, I can be a scientist. And and I did. Like I was super curious. I do experiments in the kitchen and then I, play with colors and make messes and I just bounce back and forth. Like they weren't separate things to me growing up. And my parents were very good at encouraging that. And it wasn't until I was starting to look towards, university and, growing up where my parents strongly encouraged me to pursue sciences. They felt, I could always do art on the side. It would really be hard to do science on the side unless, you're doing Frankenstein in your garage. But so they felt it was a safer path. And so they encouraged me to go into science. And I did. So I did an undergrad in biology. I got interested in plants. I was really interested in genetics in the lab, but when you're doing introductory genetics labs, they make you work with fruit flies, which were really gross. So we did a unit with plants and I was like, oh, I can study genetics with plants. I don't have to deal with these fruit flies. So that's what I decided to do as a master's. So I went in and did plant physiology and a bit more molecular biology. And at that point, genetically modified organisms, or GMOs as we know it, didn't have such the bad association with it. It was very new field at the time. The Monsantos of the world hadn't started doing all these, restrictive practices and so on. So for me, it seemed like a brand new, exciting field. And so I pursued a PhD in plant molecular biology and GMOs. And I was actually making, it's kind of an interesting thing, but I was making sort of an anti-cholesterol drug in an oil plant. So it was kind of interesting that I was using what usually would be used to like make margarine or something because it's very oil heavy. It's called canola here in Canada, the plant I was working with, but I was using it to make basically a drug that could help treat cholesterol, which I thought was a really neat pairing. So I was super excited about science, but I did drop art. Full disclosure, I was so busy in the lab. I lived in a tiny apartment. I had no room for what I thought I needed. I thought I needed a big studio because that's somehow how I thought a real artist was. So I thought, no, I'm going to put art aside, be a scientist. But I felt something was missing because it's, that's still very much who I was. And it wasn't until I actually had my kids that I started playing with their art materials again. And it was sort of like I could indulge myself going, oh, I'll just go to Michael's and pick this up for them. They'll really like it. But I was buying it for me. So that's kind of how I found my way back to art, was sort of that gentle nudging towards it. And I realized that I needed both in my life. I couldn't be, just the scientist or, but I also wasn't ready to sort of give up my day job and just be the artist either. So I had to work a way to figure out how to do both things. And yeah, so that's kind of how I built the and back in. And then I even started doing some shows when my kids were little. And It was, so they'd be playing in my studio and I'd be making art, and it was great. And then I'd say things changed when we moved and I got a different job, and there was a lot more pressure. I think that's probably, I had a pretty, I won't say easy job with the government, but it was very straightforward hours. I left it at the office. So it was very good for work-life balance. But then we moved for my husband's job and I got a new job. And that's when I started working in medical devices, which is very, very high pressure, because obviously you're working with things that treat people's lives. And I was in the quality and regulatory side of things. So they always joke that QARA are like the cops and the lawyers. So we make sure the engineers are building things to spec. And, with the lawyers, we're talking to FDA and Health Canada and trying to get our things through the system. And I was working at this company when COVID hit. And our company won a contract to build emergency ventilators, which I don't know if you cast your mind back, but that was before we had vaccinations. And so we thought we needed, ventilators as a last resort for everyone. And so we were all working from home, and I was working 24/7 on trying to get these ventilators approved, with my team, not just doing it on my own, but definitely as part of a team. We were working 24/7 to get these things approved and out the door and in the hands of Canadians. And, you know, even then, I used to go into my studio and relax, but during that time period, I couldn't even step into my studio. It was like I had a complete mental block. I could only do my job. And I basically burnt out, full disclosure on that one, because I worked around the clock and I was on call all the time, and my kids were home trying to do the homeschool thing. And yeah, I just burnt the candle at all the ends.
I think many of us can relate to burning the candle at all of the ends during that period, but I think so many of us do that in our kind of day-to-day lives. And for those of you who are listening, I just want to point out, as Lexi was talking and saying all these very technical terms and very science brain that she has, I am also looking at her sitting in her art studio with this beautiful artwork behind her. So it is just such a beautiful thing to see the and in motion. And as someone who comes from a math science background myself, and interestingly enough, at the beginning of this year, I said, I really want to focus on tapping into my creativity, because that's not something that I have done in a very, very long time. I was thrilled that we were able to connect and to have this conversation, because for me, I felt like tapping into my creativity was going to be a way to kind of bring myself back home to who I am. And I know that you describe creativity in that way, that it's not a performance, it's kind of a return to who we are. And, when you were speaking about your childhood and how you got to do all the things, and the and was very natural, I think for so many of us, that is how it is. And then as we grow, for whatever reason, it becomes an or. So was it during that time of COVID when you really started to find yourself kind of returning to your creativity as a healing and self-regulating tool?
It was. And what's interesting, it wasn't making art in the way that I had always been making art, because up until that point, I was making art as a finished product. I was making art to show at, art shows and art in the park, with the booth. And there's always that sense that because my time was so limited, any time in the studio, I had to be productive. And, while I'm burning myself out in my job, and then suddenly going into my studio and going, I got to make something good in here because I only have a limited amount of time, I started freezing. I was like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to make. And I actually started looking into art therapy, because I thought, this is something that I should think about, because I'm drawn to art, but I'm having this odd blockage right now because I'm so tapped out with everything else. And what I started doing, and I started reading up on it and getting myself more educated about how art therapy works with the brain and the body is, and with regulation with your nervous system, is you take the pressure off producing something good. You just make something. It doesn't have to be anything. It could be literally, some of the activities are literally drawing lines on a piece of paper in time with your breath. And that's a great way to slow down your nervous system, because it gets you out of that fight or flight response and it gets you more into that rest and digest. So, for the sympathetic to the parasympathetic system, basically. And you'll actually feel your breathing slow because you start focusing more on what your hand is doing, what you're moving across the paper. And just these I almost call them gentle activities. They're very gentle because there's no expectation with them. Another one that is a great one to do is what I call the body scan. And you basically draw like a gingerbread character, just, simple outline of a person. And, I was using my kids' Crayola markers, so it doesn't have to be like fancy art supplies. And you just reach for colors that appeal to you and draw almost like symbols or shapes in the various parts of your body where you're feeling stress. And it could be, like red prickly things in your head or your neck or your shoulders. It could be, orange butterflies in your stomach. You just kind of reach for, it's like an intuitive process. And then you start sort of thinking about, well, where do I feel grounding? Where do I feel more restful? And, you might draw green lines going into the earth through your feet. And I've done this exercise with a number of women, and everyone is so quick to figure out where their stress is, but it's so interesting to see when they actually take time to reflect of, where do I feel, that grounding, that relaxation. And not everyone picks, the bright, loud colors for stress. Some people find grays and blacks and browns are more what they're drawn to. But everyone's very quick to figure out where their stress is, less quick to figure out what relaxes them and grounds them. So those are just some examples of some of the activities that I started doing for myself. And they're quick, right? They're not this big, obviously you can see I have a ton of art supplies and paintings, and those paintings behind me are multi-layer collage with sanding, with painting, with sanding, with painting. Like it's meant to look like old graffitied walls. And they take a long time, and they're still not done. So, to do these little exercises it's just about the process. It wasn't about the finished, I'm not making Mona Lisa here. It was just getting back in touch with my creativity and expressing things that were inside. And the interesting thing is then it gives you something on paper to look at. And it's like a snapshot of what you're feeling at the time. So you can put that drawing away and come back to it a week later and check in with yourself. You're saying, am I still feeling those areas? Has something changed? Has something shifted? And then you can also talk about it with others. I have a group session where we all, do our drawings and then talk about them. And that's great for building connection and community, where you can see where other women are holding their stress and where they're feeling grounded as well.
I love this idea so much. I have talked a few times about my experience with some mental health treatment facilities, and in one of those times, I did art therapy myself, and it was the first time, I think, in my life where I sat down to do something artistic, and I have used some very negative language toward myself about I'm not artistic or creative. But I sat down and didn't feel like I had to be perfect. And I think for so many of us who don't feel like it is intuitive, that creative side of us, and that we have to work at it a little bit, part of that working at it is we think that when we sit down, we have to produce something that is, and I'm going to use air quotes here, art, right? And so
Art with a capital A.
Yes, exactly. So you just described so beautifully that it's allowing you to really kind of tap into that intuitive process and take the pressure off. Are there some tips that you could give to the listener who might struggle with that in the beginning, and they sit down and they want to do something, but they have a vision for what they want to produce, and then when it doesn't look like that on the paper, how can they start to maybe let go of some of that?
Yeah, definitely. Like, I know a lot of women when they first start working with me are very nervous about, well, what art supplies do I need? And oh, do I need to run out and get the nicest journal and some beautiful pens? I was like, no, just grab some computer paper, loose paper, blank, it's fine. Have a pen, have a pencil. If you want some highlighters or some markers, all of that's easy, and that takes the pressure off because you don't have the sense of, oh, I'm going to waste these great materials, and oh, I'm too nervous to like draw on this perfect journal. And I was like, no, that's not, you can definitely, if you want to indulge yourself, go to the store and enjoy it. But to start, it's just very easy. What do you have in your house? Even just a simple notebook you take notes on by the phone, though these days everyone does it on their phone deliberately, but just, it's meant to be easy. So you reduce that barrier to entry. It's like, okay, I have, my supplies, quote, what next? And what next can be, I find simple things like whether it's drawing spirals, drawing repetitive patterns is great because again, it puts you into a meditative, almost a Zen state, but you don't have to sit there quietly for 10 minutes and try to think of nothing, which for me, like I've been trying to do meditation and some days I'm great at it. And other days I find doing sort of the pen and paper work a lot easier because you're just focused on your hand making little shapes over and over again. And then you could change the shapes and then you could join the shapes. Another really fun activity that I do with the women is, again, you do a simple scribble drawing, just, move your hand all over the paper. And then you start coloring in a few shapes. And then you look to see if something speaks to you. Some people see a face, some people see a bird, some people see a, animal. And then you can sort of, maybe you want to add an eye here, maybe you want to add a smile here. You just sort of go with it. And it's that sense of play, and you just sort of follow the breadcrumbs. You're like, oh, I see something here. Oh, it's like when you stare up at the clouds and you just let yourself see shapes. Again, because it's not a defined destination. You didn't set out to draw a face. You didn't set out to draw a bird or a cat or a dog. It was just, oh, that's suddenly what you see there. And you can just go with it. And just that process is very relaxing as well, too, because you take all that pressure of needing to make something.
I love the idea of taking the pressure off to make something. And as you were describing the scribbly line, so I hope that what I'm about to say that everyone knows and can relate to it and isn't like, oh, that's really gross. So, as you're taking a shower, hair is falling out. And if you have long hair like I do, a lot of hair is falling out in the shower and I don't want it to go down the drain. So I will like stick it on the side of the wall and then come back to it when I get out of the shower. But I find myself as I keep like sticking it to the wall, I'm looking for shapes and patterns and what do I see in that, much like you were just describing a scribbly line on a piece of paper. So I'm just throwing that out there. If anyone else is trying to keep their hair from going down the shower drain, you can turn that into a fun creative process.
I am totally seeing you like moving the hair on the side of the wall now. Yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes I will move it and sometimes I want to leave it exactly how it was and just what can I find? And then I promise at the end of the shower, I do come get it and throw it away.
I have short hair, so I don't get to indulge in my shower scribbles as much, but yes, I do love that.
Oh, goodness. I told you I was trying to be very intentional at the beginning of this year to be more creative, and I didn't know that was going to be one of the ways that it happened, but it has for sure. So when we first met, we were talking about some of the activities that you do with your clients. And so you just gave some beautiful examples of ones where you don't go with any preconceived idea of what it is that you're trying to create. But you also mentioned some examples of you might give your clients a particular thing to draw and then kind of explore what it is that they leave in or put in the paper, and then also the things that they leave out. And I would just love for you to share a little bit about that with our listener, because I think it's so cool. Not just what you drew on the paper, but what did you choose to leave out?
Yeah. So well, the one that comes to mind is the bridge exercise. So this is an exercise where, so with a lot of my programs, I do like a little demonstration video, and then that's what I send to my clients. And so it has some pretty loose instructions in it, but so I'll just sort of walk you through the exercise. But essentially, you are drawing two shores. So you've got yourself where you are currently, whatever emotional, mental state you are on one side. And then on the other side is what you aspire to, what you want to feel, what you're moving towards. And between these two shores, you get to draw a bridge. And I leave it up to my clients to draw whatever kind of bridge they want. It could be a drawbridge, it could be a stone bridge, it could be the Golden Gate Bridge. What I find is, and I don't even like give them this instruction, but a lot of them end up drawing really rickety wood, plank, and rope bridges, like the sort of bridge you would totally freak out if you had to cross a chasm to the other side on. And what's interesting is, you know, their ideal side where they want to be. It is sunshine and forests and waterfalls. And, some people drew a beach they're trying to get to, or mountains. And what they're currently in is like dark, stormy skies. It's raining. A lot of them draw rain in stormy skies, which is because that's showing how they're emotionally feeling, right? It makes sense. They're feeling. Others are, just, overcoming obstacles to get to their bridge. Um, and what's interesting is obviously, they go off and then we come back and discuss it. And I've discussed it one-on-one with a few people and then also as a group. And in some of my one-on-one discussions, and the idea is that you're building a bridge over obstacles, right? So one of my clients said she drew these really stormy rapids underneath her bridge. And, there were planks missing on the bridge. And she, we were talking about it. And afterwards, she was saying, why did I draw these waves? I can't swim. And why did I take planks out? Like, I'm making this more difficult for myself. Um, in one of our group discussions, we discussed that we all had a troll living under our bridge, and the troll was ourselves, and we were trying to pull ourselves off our own bridge. And it's really interesting to see what people put into the picture versus, again, what they leave out. Why did you leave out those planks? Why didn't you put a rope along the side to help you along? Like, it's your bridge. You could make it as easy as possible to get to the other side, and yet you put all these obstacles in your way. So I found that exercise really interesting. Another one we did is drawing a lighthouse, where the lighthouse is what you're aspiring, and what is your guiding light to keep you on your path. And you're allowed, you bring a boat, it's just you and the boat, but you can put whatever you want in the boat. And again, one of my clients was looking at it going, I forgot to put a life jacket in the boat, what am I doing? So but it's again funny how you visually see that you can self-sabotage yourself. You're given totally carte blanche on what you want to bring, and yet you work against yourself on trying to achieve your goals. So
Such a nice visual representation of what is going on inside of us so much of the time, and we don't even realize it, but when we put it on paper or canvas, so much insight that comes from that. So I think I'm going to try this activity. I know this is the second time I've heard you tell this story, and I think I need to do it.
well, and what's interesting is, again, you can come back and look at it as well, and you can see, I always ask my clients, how close are you to your bridge? Are you halfway across, 3/4? And a lot of them, I'm like, I haven't even stepped foot near the bridge yet. So it's a nice way of checking in with yourself, of going, oh, how far are you along your bridge now? So that's another way of coming back and reflecting as well.
Yeah. because I'm way more likely to go back and look at that than I am to go back and like reread journal entries. Not that there isn't value in journaling, don't get me wrong, but I'm not super apt to go back and read them. Whereas I might go back and look at a picture and be like, where do I feel like I am on this bridge today?
Yeah. Or, oh, those waters have calmed now a bit. Or, just even sort of, it's like, I call it a visual artifact, right? It is how you're feeling at that time, right? And it's great to reflect, and it's very quick. You can go back and almost feel those sensations of when you were making the drawing as well too. It's very visceral, that feeling. Whereas writing is great. Like, I do agree, like, and I do ask my clients to write down notes as they come up, while they're reflecting. But there is something about, it's that picture in 1,000 words, right? You can almost like immediately snap back into what were you thinking when you drew
it. Yes. And as you're talking about that, I'm thinking about some of those pieces that I did when I was in that treatment facility and doing art therapy. And I remember going back to look at those a week, 2 weeks, a few months later. And it is very much a visceral experience when you're looking at them again. So for the woman who finds herself, kind of in that stormy side and maybe hasn't even decided to step on the bridge just yet, and she's just feeling very depleted and maybe overstimulated and just doesn't quite know where to start, what might be your favorite creative ritual for grounding to get her moving?
Well, I mentioned the breathing exercise. That's a quick, easy one, just drawing lines in time with your breath. Another fun component is picking music that you like to listen to, and pick some colors and try to almost just draw in time to the music. So if it's more upbeat, you'll find that your hand's moving faster. You may make some swoopy lines. You may make some doodles. If there's a beat, you may start making marks on the paper in time to the beat. So that's great because it works, again, because you're doing something physical with your hands, but you're also not thinking because you're listening to the music, and it kind of gets you out of your body and out of your head as well. So that's a really nice, especially again, because you pick something upbeat. But even doing slow classical music, if you need to relax, I always laugh, but I go to Enya. Like if somehow that sail away song, I just like, I need to sail away, and I'm just going to just draw some blues on a page, and it's really works. Like it sounds so simple, but just listening to a song you like and picking some colors that just, make lines on the page, and it doesn't, again, have to be anything tangible. The other thing I like doing is, if you are just walking, go for a walk at lunch or after work, and just take little pictures of textures that appeal to you. Like, you might see a leaf on the sidewalk. You might see some interesting, weeds growing up in the concrete. Like, luckily I live near the woods, so I can go out, but I understand not everybody can go out into the woods and take pictures of trees. But just even, taking pictures of interesting graffiti, I find, if you zoom in and look just at the colors and how they appeal to you, it's like making a sort of a digital collage, basically. And again, it trains your eyes to start looking for colors and textures that appeal to you. And that's a great sensory sort of treat that way. So that's really easy to do because you don't, everyone these days has a camera on their phone. And then again, you can go back and look at them, right? Like, you can make a little, digital scrapbook. So yeah, I try to make things simple for my clients, because I know, like, if I said, oh, okay, we're going to sit down, we're going to paint now, they'd be like, oh, I'm not ready, I don't know how to use paint. And so I try to work them up that way. So a lot of my activities just start with simple drawing, but knowing there's collage and there's painting and there's sculpture, all of those things are out there, but I try to sort of do a very simple gateway into creativity with them.
Yeah. I'm noticing, whatever the modality is, I think the idea of starting simple is a common theme throughout everything. And it's when we try to make things overly complicated or put some sort of demand or pressure on ourselves that then what could be an incredible tool becomes just an added stressor. So I want to reiterate, start with something simple and something that you already might enjoy. As you were talking about listening to music and drawing to that, I love live music, or I love music, live music for sure, but I love music. And so, you said everyone has a phone with them and they have their camera. I have a ton of music on my phone too, so that is with me at all times. So recognizing what is already accessible to us and already at our fingertips that we can tap into without it being expensive or an added stress or overcomplicating it. I love all these simple approaches that you have offered to the listener. So for highly sensitive women in particular, what's one message that you hope that she can take away from what we've talked about today with regard to creativity?
That it does, it feels good. Like it's, let yourself try it out again. Let yourself play. Go back to being when you're, the kid in the art store and you just wanted to try all the things and you didn't have to think about, oh, I'm wasting materials, right? Like just have fun with it. Allow yourself to have fun with it, because it will make you feel better. It will help you de-stress. And it doesn't have to be complicated. Even just drawing simple spirals on a page, listening to music, you'll find your nervous system, it calms down and resets. And, it gives you a little bit of time to yourself as well, which I think we all, we're always doing things for others. And, this is just a little small creative ritual you can do for yourself.
I love that so much. Thank you for all of the wisdom that you have brought to today's conversation. If a listener wanted to learn more about you, where can they find you?
Yeah, easiest thing is to go to my website. It's Mind Art Wellness altogether. There is a free 5-day creative reset exercise, a challenge. It's not really a challenge, but it's called a challenge. But yeah, each day you'd get an email sent to you with a little link to a video and some reflective questions. And very much like doing these exercises I was talking about that I do with my clients, you get to try it for yourself. I also have a sign up on my website for a weekly newsletter where I send out little tips each week about mindset, wellness, and creativity as well. So those are 2 great free resources on my website.
Thank you so much for being here. Such a treat to have this conversation. And I know that everyone listening is going to feel a little bit more creative as a result.
Oh, thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun chatting.